Jimi Hendrix and Eddie Kramer.
Thank you.
Already.
So I have never heard that in Atmos. That's the first time. Jimmy would have loved Atmos.
He would
have loved
Yes.
this technology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a very quick story. We're mixing Electric Ladyland at the record plant. This is 1968. And of course, the technology at that point, there's no bloody computers. It's just, 4 hands on the desk, rehearse it a couple of times, and away you go. And we're mixing Gypsy Eyes, which probably you remember from Electric Ladyland. And suddenly, we're in the middle of the mix, and all of a sudden, I'm using a lot of phasing and stuff and all kinds of special effects. Something happens at a certain point in the song. All of a sudden, the guitar goes whoosh right behind our heads. And Jimmy looks at me, and I'm looking at him, and he says, what the hell happened? I said, I don't know. Can you do that again? And I tried, I swear to God, I tried so hard for it. It was a mistake, it was an accident, but we printed it, thank God, and it's on the actual, you can hear it all of a sudden, and I know if Jimmy had lived, he would have wanted to hear that guitar go wee around the room.
Atmos, 40 years
Yeah.
ahead of its time.
Anyway,
Sounds great.
sorry, had to tell the story.
It's good, it's good. So let me say by way of introduction that I did a read-through of John and Eddie's Wikipedia entries earlier, and a sad and a possibly unique fact is introducing me as well. John's extensive world-class resume, which includes studios like Rue Boyer, kind of the studio of the past decade in Paris, studios for Alicia Keys, Bob Marley, Bruce Springsteen, Atlantic, Sony, Spotify, hundreds more. There are thousands. Sorry?
Upstate Films.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So he did also, he designed my studio, which is called Blue Rock. It was the second studio John designed. But I've noticed in his Wikipedia entry listing those hundreds of studios, my studio is not listed. Similarly, the album that I executive produced with Eddie Kramer, and he produced it, a little band called Photomaker, was a delightful album that featured members of the Rascals and the Raspberries, two very popular bands in the 60s and 70s. That lovely little album did not make the Wikipedia list of Eddie Kramer Grammy winners or any other significant Kramer productions. So I am still hoping I get another chance with these guys. So
Maybe.
So let's ask a few questions. Eddie, set the stage for us. There's not a lot about this in the film, but before Generation, before the scene, how had you arrived in a position in the world of recording and engineering that led you to Jimmy and led him to you?
Well, I started as a musician, I guess, growing up in a very musical household. I listened to classical music and studied piano from the age of about 4, and loved anything to do with music, essentially. My parents were really wonderful, and they started giving me piano lessons from that age, and listened to every kind of music that I could begin to think of, from Bach to Brahms to Shostakovich, and grew up with it. But by the time I was about 12, that's when things started changing. I grew up in South Africa, in Cape Town, and there was no TV. But I did have a shortwave radio, and I was able to tune in to the Voice of America and the BBC Overseas Service. And that's when I started to realize there was other music out there. And I heard Little Richard for the first time. I went, wow, what is that? There's this guy banging away on this piano, and he's singing his ass off. And I thought, oh, I want some of that. I need to get involved with that. And from there, I went to jazz, and to more rock and roll stuff, and my classical studies were slowly in decline. But I did study classical music right up until I left high school. And I still love classical music. It's part of my DNA, I guess. From there, I went to England with my parents. We did it about 3 times, and the last time was in 1960, and then early 62, I got my first gig in a recording studio after having fiddled around with various strange things like working for an advertising agency. There's many stories connected with that, but I won't bore you with the details. But essentially, my first job was in 1962 at Advision Sound Studios at 83 New Bond Street in London, and I was the tea boy. And I used to go around to the folks and say, with my tray of tea like this, it's a huge tea with a big teapot. Would you like milk with that? And that's what you were. And you sort of, you cleaned the toilets and you did the tea.
You're going to throw us out at midnight, Eddie.
Oh, do I have to stop? All right, I'll shut up then. But you wanted the story. From there, it was a climb up through various studios until I reached Olympic Studios, which was in London in 1967, where I met Jimmy for the first time. And from there...
have you recorded anyone of significance before?
No. Well, not really. I mean, yeah, there's the Beatles.
Yeah,
But anyway.
so we can throw that in.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So, John, at the time that the film begins, where we see you as a newly minted architect, having really almost months before completed your education, and then there was Cerebrum, nicely represented tonight. What would your career arc had been? What would it have been had you not gotten fired by Eddie and then rehired by Eddie Kramer? What would have happened? Were you going to be a traditional architect? Where were you headed?
Well, when I moved to the village, and I'm a suburban kid. I grew up in suburban Long Island. Went to Princeton architecture, but when I moved to Manhattan in June of '68, I really thought I was going to be a musician. I was in a 12-piece blues band. I, like Eddie, also grew up studying classical music, clarinet player. Clarinet soon became a sax. Not much use for clarinets in a blues band.
True.
And I had a day job. I had to make some money, so I had a day job in an architecture office, which was relatively boring, and really was in a blues band. And my then wife at the time, not the current wife, the then wife, let's be clear, was also in a band. Actually, she was in an old girls band that was more successful than our band. So I was really thought I'd be a musician until the story, which I don't have to repeat because luckily we did it already, and life changed on a dime almost overnight. And one thing led to another, and like Linda said in the movie, before the studio was open, it was famous. I mean, it was famous almost from the first minute. Before the studio opened, I was introduced to Albert Grossman. Everybody here knows who Albert Grossman was. Albert became a mentor of mine. I lived on his property. I designed Bearsville Studios. I went to Woodstock with Albert, actually, and Woodstock Festival, the festival where, of course, Eddie was recording the festival. So I was not in the mud. I was actually with Eddie in the recording truck, thank goodness. And
it wasn't that much better, was it?
it was much better than being in the mud, but so I'm not sure where I don't think about that. Actually, I never think about that. This is everything led up to today at Upstate Films.
Yeah.
And this is really surreal to be here. I have to tell you, I'm not used to being. It's actually a little bit unnerving. I'm a behind the scenes guy. I'm not used to having lights on me. I'm very comfortable drawing and making the spaces, but it's.
Well, let's talk about drawings for a second. Yeah. So tonight we saw some of the images of the drawings that you did for Electric Lady. Tell us a little bit, how many of those drawings were there? Where are they now? What happened to them?
Well, the whole studio was built with 7 drawings. 7 drawings. You saw one of them. I still have them. I drew every single one of them in pencil on vellum, and they are actually in my storage, in the storage building. They're my office, and I still own them. I've been offered, actually, some people have offered to buy them, and not for sale. Yeah, I drew them myself.
And something we also saw a little bit tonight, as Eddie calls it, the pregnant curve outside Electric Lady. That
This is a
iconic shape.
sore subject. Very sore, very. So that curve, we needed a facade. I mean, the building has a pretty strange history. The building was designed in 1927 by Frederick Kiesler. I'm sure nobody here has ever even heard of Frederick Kiesler. But Frederick Kiesler was a Viennese architect who came over to the United States as a young man and got this commission to do a movie theater. And the movie theater is
right
what
above.
was, for many years, on top of Electric Lady. It's why the ceiling slopes. It's why the floor slopes. The movie theater was there until actually the 90s, and then now it's some kind of health facility. They flattened out the floor. But I was a huge fan of Frederick Kiesler's in school, and also Antonio Gaudí. And Frederick Kiesler really only designed 2 buildings in his life. He designed this movie theater, and at the end of his life, he designed the Dead Sea Scrolls Museum in Israel, which is this sort of egg-shaped, curved structure, which was very influential. And I knew about the theater, but I didn't know where it was. And you can imagine the moment when I realized that I didn't even know I was in the basement of his building until long after I started designing it. But when we went to the building department to file the drawings, of course nobody does that now, there's the original blueprints on file with his name. I screamed in the building department because, wait a second, I'm in the basement of that movie theater that I've
Walking in
seen.
the basement of giants.
It was bizarre, but anyway, the curves were something I was exploring in college. Charlie Gwathmey was an early teacher of mine. I was a Corbusier fan. And so when it came time for the outside of the building, it just seemed, well, let's just see if we can't just make this curve. And it was right, it was Shimon's idea to put the little circle in it. And when we went before the historical, but we had to get permission to do this from the landmarks. And they looked at it, and they said, why are you doing this shape? And Jim Marin, unbeknownst to me, without rehearsing, says, well, records are round. And they said, well, I guess that makes sense. And this is a true story. I don't know.
One key to Jim Marin's greatness was his ability to do those.
He was, and then of course, sadly enough, it got torn down. What most people never realized, or maybe don't realize today, is that Jimmy didn't buy the building. Jimmy bought the lease to the club, and to this day, the owners, the great owners, Lee and Keith, who own the studio now, still don't own the building. They've been paying rent for 55 years to the same family.
That's terrible.
This could be one of the worst real estate deals
Real
of all
estate in New
time.
York, folks.
Right. And unfortunately, when the theater ended and it became a health facility, they needed an extra 2 feet to get the door widths, okay? And the owners just tore it down one day, and we heard about it. We tried desperately to get it landmarked, and we just were a little bit too late. Lee promises me that one day they will restore that iconic front.
So, speaking about doors, a little bit about the studio doors that Jimmy rejected the doors with the horizontal windows because he wanted round doors in the studio. What happened to the doors that...
That's a layup question.
Yes, that Jimmy rejected.
The doors essentially went to Blue Rock Studios.
I never...
And Joe, I actually believe Jimi Hendrix is going to be sending you an invoice.
Well, she kind can if she wants to. But there's another piece of the story actually that speaks to Jimmy and to the opening of Electric Lady. While I was building Electric Lady, it was
Blue Rock.
about 5 minutes from Electric Lady. My carpentry crew was layabout hippies that would show up for work at 1 o'clock and kind of work when they wanted, and it was funky. But Electric Lady's carpenters, much more professional, and
Not that much more.
not that much more professional. There was a little back and forth between the carpentry crews, but the Electric Lady carpenters would go home about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and my guys who had just shown up for work about an hour before that knew the guys at Electric Lady would take the van over to the Electric Lady and kind of borrow lumber from the big guys of town and come back. So my studio was essentially built with Electric Lady's lumber. And the night that Electric Lady opened, the opening party, I was standing outside with Jimmy and smoking a cigarette, and I said, I want to thank you for all the lumber that and he looked at me and he said, is that for real? And I said, yeah, thank you. And he said, that's cool. Jimmy's generosity, Jimmy's open-mindedness.
True to form.
So let me talk a little bit with you, Eddie, about there's a lot in the film about your relationship with Jimmy, and it's very clear that the kind of trust and creative synergy that you created with each other was an extremely powerful thing. And as I think it's alluded to, if not outright mentioned, there was a trust there that just really didn't happen in a lot of other recording studio operations, which were much more cut and dry than Electric Lady. Can you talk about the qualities that you and Jimmy found in each other? What was it? What was the spirit that passed between you?
That's a great question. I think right from the very beginning when I met him, very briefly, it was 1967, late January at Olympic Studios. I'd heard about Jimmy, had a hit already, with Hey Joe, et cetera, and we heard that Jimmy was booking in. Chas Chandler was very unhappy with some of the studios they were working in London at the time. Are You Experienced? The album it was just beginning, basically. And they booked Olympic, and I remember seeing the roadies come in carrying the big Marshall stacks on the shoulder. "Oi, where do you want this then?" Okay, the drums are set up, Jimmy's amps, bass, and Jimmy's sitting way in the back of the studio on a little bench or chair, and it was bloody cold, and he was just shivering. He had this sort of like a beige raincoat on, and amps are on. Okay, Jimmy walks over to the amp, and I'm running around like a crazy man trying to find, okay, this mic goes here, this mic goes here, and blah, blah, blah. He goes up to the amp, switches on, plugs in, and I'm about from there to here, and he hits a chord, and my life changed in a nanosecond. Because the sound of that amplifier hitting that one chord, it just went to my nervous system. My hair stood up on the back of my head, and literally my life changed. And the battle was on, because then I had to figure out how the hell am I going to record Jimi Hendrix very quickly. So within a few minutes, I got some sounds together, came back into the control room. He comes up and listened to a quick, I always had tape running. And he came in and listened, and he's looking at me and, okay. He walks back out to the studio and starts fiddling with the pedals, changing some sounds on the amp. Okay, try this, Kramer. Okay, and now I'm madly going over the patch play, delays, reverb, whatever I could do to help Jimmy get a sound or to improve the sound. So he would come back in and, okay, let's try this. And then we kept trying to top each other. And once we reached the point where we said, okay, enough's enough. We trust each other. It was in our brains. We knew that this was the way it was going to be. I would always keep pushing the limit of what can be done to tweak the sound. is there anything else I have in my armory? Whatever it is. I would sometimes get some Scotch tape and wrap it around the capstan of the tape machine so that when the reverb went, instead of it being a normal reverb, it would go blip, 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 and he would say, yeah, that's cool.
Leave room.
So that's the vibe. That's why it was so much fun working with him, and we trusted each other, and the game was on.
And you were willing to kind of be adventurous and open with each other. It wasn't always the case with producers and artists and engineers.
No. I love kicking the doors down and just opening it up and just saying, okay, what can we do? How can we improve this? Yeah.
And just talk for a brief minute about the relationship that also existed with Mitch and Noel, because I don't know that people really understand what happened with the synergy between those guys.
It was very tight. I think Mitch was the key in terms of his ability to interpret what Jimmy was doing and keep with him to make it interesting. He was very influenced by Elvin Jones. You know, jazz drummers was his thing. He loved jazz. You can really hear it in his playing. And Noel, being originally a rhythm guitar player, switched to bass on the first audition. That's how he got the gig. But I thought, you know, Noel had a bad rep from a lot of people. He had a bit of a chip on his shoulder, but he was a great bass player, make no mistake, and he was very solid. So, because when you think of Mitch's playing, he does these drum fills. And I remember so clearly watching Jimmy, here comes a drum fill from Mitch, and it's going to go, oh my God, is he ever going to land on the downbeat? And Jimmy's looking at him, we're looking at me, ah! And he hits it on the downbeat, doing this impossible drum fill, and Jimmy's cracking up and laughing because what he did was impossible, and it was wonderful. He had this great empathy for what Jimmy was doing. Same with Noel, keep it solid, keep it on the beat, and that was the relationship.
Just a couple more questions, then I think we'll open it up if you guys have questions. For both of you, for John first, both of you guys have been to Electric Lady many times over the past 50 years or so. What happens when you walk in? John, what's the feeling? Is there some, you know, are you moved? Are you connected emotionally? What's the sense for you when you go back into this place from whence everything sprang?
You didn't tell me about that question. In general, I am a looking forward person. May not seem that way, but I don't pay very much attention to what I did, despite the fact that this evening is a reminder of something from a long time ago. People ask me, what's your favorite studio? A few thousand studios later, my answer is always the same. It's the one I'm working on. It's literally, that's my answer. But Electric Lady, this is the first studio I ever did. It wasn't an accident, it was pure serendipity. Capital S, it's my favorite word, truly my favorite word. I mean, to get fired and hired by the same guy in 12 hours, then he becomes a lifetime friend, to do a project that you basically had that you essentially lied and said you could do it, and we could just keep going on and on. So I go there, I don't mix. I'm not a mixing engineer. I actually don't really like engineering that much, mixing. But I have a tremendous respect and know a lot of engineers, obviously. So I go there, I'm kind of somewhat friends with the new owners. I was responsible really for them becoming the owners. And so I go there often, sometimes just to say hello. And despite the fact that the entrance is in there, it is very cool because the stairs are exactly the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
They are exactly the same stairs. There's a picture of Jimmy. Then things have changed a little in the lobby. The control room has changed a little bit. And then I walk into the studio, and it's the same ceiling. And despite the fact that there's this water underneath the floor, and if you want to believe that's the reason for the sound, knock yourself out. And if you think Jimmy's vibe is in the wall, which I guess it is, and that's the cause of the sound, you're welcome for that. But the real reason why the room works is because of the ceiling. It took 25 years to find that out because I didn't really, not only did it take 25 years to learn what we had accidentally done, but also to measure it, to actually, okay, it's a membrane absorber. Strangely enough, that ceiling is essentially doing the same thing that this ceiling is doing. I don't think we'll go any further than that because we're going to get into a little too much science. So for me, it's exciting to go back there, and I don't think there's another studio that I return to with any frequency at all. You're lucky to get paid by the studio owners, and you move on. But yeah, it's a
I don't think
thrill.
I'll tell you the story about the guitar never mind that.
Oh, the guitar, yeah, no.
So, Eddie, I also think people are interested in knowing.
You know, I want to tell one more story because
Go for
it was at Electric Lady. I once asked, I mean, I visited there a number of times, certainly when Eddie's working. And I once asked Eddie, I said, can you really tell the difference between these little moves that you're doing? I mean, Eddie's going crazy on the board. And he says, yeah, I really can. I said, okay, hold on. So there was a mix that was up, a very complicated mix, you know, full band, orchestra, right? And I said, okay, turn around. So I mean, I know enough about the console, so I go up to the,
This is such a John thing to do.
I go up to, and you know, we got a lot of engineers here. You know, there's a lot of all the tape is on there with the instruments. So I go up to guitar 2. Okay, guitar 2. I go to the equalizing section. I go to the mid-band section, 1K, 2K, and I put on like a 1 or a 2 beat, just a little 2 dB notch on it. I can't hear, no one can hear this. None of you can hear this in a full mix. And then I said, okay, put it back on. I said, okay, so what did I do? And Eddie's listens for about 10 seconds. He said, you did something with the guitar in the mid-range. I don't know, 1 or 2 dB, something in the guitar in the mid-range.
No, 1 dB, 1 to 2 dB.
And that was the last time I ever challenged you and had any discussion on your abilities. You remember that?
Of course.
Yes, I couldn't
Yeah,
believe it.
It's about 1.5 dB. I remember.
I couldn't believe it. That anybody could hear that. He can hear it. And the mix that we just heard, that's his work. The song is Jimmy's. The mix is Eddie's.
And actually, as the mix is playing, as Dolly Dagger is playing, he leans over to me to listen to where it phases right there, and it's like
It's crazy, yeah.
So yeah, I was going to ask you about first of all, the current release of Jimmy material, the CD set that we talked about earlier, the full set, and you know how that came together, and what the amazing treasure trove of Hendrix material, and where is it? What's next? What remains?
I get asked this question quite often, and I know John McDermott, who produced the movie, John McDermott, myself, and Jimi Hendrix, have done all of Jimmy's albums and movies and stuff over the last, since '94. We've gotten lucky over the last 30, 40 years. Magically, somehow or other, somebody says, you know, we found a tape in our attic, and do you want to, it's got Jimi Hendrix's name on it, and sometimes it's a pile of boxes of tape, sometimes it's just a cassette, sometimes it's a 1/4 inch, and we're very fortunate that we've been able to incorporate some of those things into our releases. But this particular batch of songs is actually from the last 4 months that we were working, 3 or 4 months we were working together for Cry of Love, where we've described in the movie, bringing in all those tapes and then listening to and
Where
fixing
were
them.
those tapes?
Well, they certainly at that point they were at Electric Lady and the locker, as you saw. But right now the tapes, of course, are in a vault. There's duplicates of them in various hidden places. And I will not tell you the answer. No. So the concept of this album was to go into the original tapes and find the penultimate, or maybe not the penultimate, master, and see how it was translating and what was happening and what was in Jimmy's mind leading up to the master. And that's what makes it so fascinating. As you get to hear Jimmy almost there, and you just know it's almost there, but it sounds so cool because sometimes the rhythm's different, or sometimes the guitar playing, and sometimes the solos are different. And that's what makes it so much fun. And then the best part about it is you get to hear the interaction of Jimmy when we stop the tape, and he's going, yeah, but what about this part? And I go, what about that part? And we have a conversation back and forth, and we've kept all of those conversations in. Or sometimes the roadie will hit the talk back and say, hey, Jimmy, I brought this salmon for you. Can you mind if we plug it in? No, bugger off. So it's that intimate working with Jimmy and hearing how the songs have evolved. And some of the songs haven't even been heard before, which is even better. So it's definitely worthwhile getting. And of course, then you've got, by the way, a Blu-ray of this movie is incorporated into the CD package. And there's also Dolby Atmos mixes and 5.1 surround sound mixes, which is, if you have the ability to be able to play that, it makes it a lot of fun. So I hope I answered your question.
And if you play it loud enough, he'll come to your house and get it.
Oh, yeah.
So two more quick questions. First of all, from each of you guys, a very brief description of your current projects. John?
Still working. Sort of went from one person to 60 people. My wife, Beth, who's here, is my partner for 35 years.
Yes.
And there's
That's Walters-Storyk.
that's the W. And we always have a half a dozen studios we're working on. The studio world has changed quite a bit. Working on a beautiful studio in the Caribbean right now, and 2 studios in Florida. Some projects with Antonov. Yeah, we've done 3 projects with Antonov. We're doing yet another project with Alicia in California, Alicia Keys. So staying very busy. Have some of my team here tonight. Thank you. I can't see you, but I know you're here.
Oh,
Yep,
yeah.
exactly. So.
You want to talk about her for a second?
Yep, we're I've done a number of projects with Herb Alpert. It's an honor to have met him, and about to start one with Harry Connick, probably in Australia, believe it or not. So things are still exciting. Beth and I live half of our time in the Hudson Valley. We've been here for 35 years, and in the winter we go to Mexico. It's warmer.
And any current projects?
Yeah, my wife and I, AJ is sitting over there. Yeah.
The secret sauce behind Mr. Kramer, by the way.
Without
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. We've been working very hard on 2 movies, actually, that come out almost at the same time. Anybody here of the Trailer Park Boys? If you haven't, you might want to try this movie out. It's pretty funny. It's coming out next month. And the final scene of the movie we shot at Abbey Road in January of this year. Billy Bob Thornton's co-starring with Mike Smith, who plays Bubbles. Anybody seen the Trailer Park Boys? Nobody? Oh, okay. Well, it's a Canadian kind of thing. The final scene has got 100 people in the studio for about 3 days, and we had Billy Bob Thornton, Ronnie Wood from the Stones, Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, et cetera, et cetera. There's a ton of, I guess, big stars. And Paul McCartney's horn section, a rhythm section, and all these different actors and actresses. And you can imagine the last scene is a song being sung by the character Bubbles, who has written a song about cats. And I swear to God, they're singing the song about standing on the shoulders of kitties. And it's hilarious. I guarantee you, it's a laugh from beginning to end. I won't bore you with the details of it.
And you're in it.
And I've got the last scene in there where I'm actually using the old Beatles console, and it's shot over the shoulder there, and I'm actually in the bloody movie for whatever reason.
And it's in Atmos?
It
Everything's
is,
in
yes, it
Atmos.
is in Atmos. Yes, of course it is. Yes.
So,
But the other movie is this one. So there you are. Those are the two. And a bunch of projects. Jazz record in Argentina from
In a
JR
studio we did, yeah.
A band I'm working with now called ROC. They're from Los Angeles, and all ladies, 3 ladies, are the best, unbelievable rock and roll band. Orianthi on guitar, Cindy Blackman, who's Carlos Santana's wife, on drums, and Rhonda Smith on bass, and they are unbelievable. So that's what I'm working on.
So look for that. So the last question that I have for both of you guys, I always love it when this question comes up. It's a 2-part question. Going to start with you, John. Your favorite piece of music, that's one part. And the second part is the music that you choose to listen to when you walk into a studio or a room, a sound space, so that you can understand the texture, the feeling, the quality of the room and know what you're going to do with it.
I'm going to answer the second one first. So and I'm very anxious to hear his answer because I have no idea what he's going to say.
And he already used the Little Richard part, so.
Yeah, I can. So there's there's 2 or 3 that I'll put on. One is a recording by Jennifer Warren's "Bird on a Wire." I don't know if any of you have heard that recording. Leonard Cohen song. There's a triangle part there that if I don't hear it, I know something's not right. It's absolutely magnificent. There's a cut on a Taj Mahal album called Korina, one of his first albums that I think is just, I know the piece, I love the piece, and I listen for some parts there, and basically anything from Thriller. Essentially anything that Bruce Swedien mixed, but particularly Thriller. And then after those 3, if I can get everybody else out of the room, the last scene in the first act from La Boheme, which is an opera by Puccini. But I got to make sure everybody else is out of the room because they're not going to believe that I really want to listen to Italian opera.
Thank you. So that's your favorite music, and is there one of those that if you wanted to? I've heard you talk many times about one piece of music.
Well, I'll never. Yeah, there's 2 songs that I want to listen to. My Smile, the Charlie Chaplin song, which I really love. Charlie Chaplin wrote the music for Smile, and there's a lot of versions of that song. And then our wedding song, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, Carole King song. I'll try to get a version of that on, usually the original, but I'll take Carol's version as well. But then I'll throw everybody out and listen to La Boheme.
So, Eddie, favorite piece of music and music that you listen to when you first walk into a room, you want to understand it.
Favorite pieces, I have to go favorite pieces of music. Anything from Bach, and I would say probably the Goldberg Variations. So many great performances of that I can think of,
Yeah.
but Glenn Gould comes to mind, the mid-1950s recording of that, and I would say the late 80s one, just to compare those 2, because Bach is so ingrained in my brain. I would say any great composers who play their own work. For Rachmaninoff, I have the collection of all 4 piano concertos by Rachmaninoff.
I'm going to add Rock too. I'm going to add Rachmaninoff too.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Rachmaninoff.
I was just listening to it the other day.
Recorded, I believe, in Philadelphia with Eugene Ormandy. It's a 1946 recording on 78 RPM that was transferred. It is stunning. It's unbelievable. The amount of power and passion from that man is just incredible. Brahms Piano Concerto No. 2 with Vladimir Horowitz and Toscanini conducting. Those are my classical stuff. And then I would say Little Richard. But going into the control room, it would be the last mix I did on the last project I did. And
Absolutely.
just put it in because I understand what it was doing, like a jazz record or a pop record that's got good bottom end, and have at it.
Isn't it interesting that the guys who made these kind of transcendent rock, iconic rock sounds, this powerful, music. Listen to Puccini and Brahms when we want to chill. So, John Storyk, Eddie Kramer, thank you very much. Okay, a couple of questions. Hey, people have some questions?
One question right there. Do it.
So,
We can hear you.
I'll repeat it.
Probably don't remember, but I recorded with you 50 some odd years ago.
Oh my goodness.
I was a piano player on the Carly Simon album.
Oh really? Congratulations. How did you put up with me?
It was a pleasure.
What's your name? I'm sorry.
Billy Murnett
You're Billy.
and Joe Murnett.
Hey, Billy Murray.
I know
Yeah,
Billy.
Give him a
Are you
hand.
kidding?
Oh yeah.
I'll say that just to blow smoke, but that was
Can't
one
believe
of the
that.
most exciting experiences I ever had as a musician.
Wait, you got to say that.
He's serious
One of the
piano
most
player.
exciting experiences I ever had was working with Mr. Kramer,
Oh, dear.
who was always wearing those signature scarves. And so, recorded with Carly.
Still available for sale.
I lived in Joe's studio, Blue Rock, for a little bit, but we won't bore you with all that. My question,
Yes, sir.
just to drill down a little bit to that period of time just before you met Jimi Hendrix. What I'm curious is, what is one thing you had learned from working with the Beatles, and I know you also recorded with the Stones briefly, and that pool of people, what's one thing you learned that you feel, made you ready for Jimi?
Patience. Just go with the flow. I mean, if it gets annoying, just find a way to work around. I mean, when you're working with artists of that stature, you just have to, it's, with the Stones, it's like, way like that, you'll never know what's going to be coming next. I mean, that's how it was in those days. I think they're much more settled these days. Jimmy, as we've just discussed, that's on another level up here. That I'll never reach that height again, I don't think. Certainly the greatest musician I've ever had the great pleasure of working with. Beatles, that was rock royalty and was wonderful. You got to have patience. You got to just go with the flow. Just if the artist is going off at a tangent, just gently sort of try to swing them back onto the track that's supposed to be. I hear something the moment they play a song, and I hear it from beginning to end. I can hear in my head where it's going to hit, where it's going, and I can also hear the possible mix situation where things could be placed, and I paint this oral picture in my brain. That's it.
Brilliant.
Nice to see you, Billy.
Yeah.
Billy Murray. Yes.
In the back, two in the back. I can't see.
Go on this one.
You're gonna go. Go, go. Jump.
Need an audience, Mike.
Hello. I was chief tech at Electric Lady in 1990, in the mid-1990s, and
Wow.
so I can attest to that. Electric Lady is a magical place.
What's your name?
Brian Macaluso.
Hi,
I
Brian.
met you there, actually. You were mixing in Studio B for a while. You were working on some of the Hendrix projects, and
Oh, no
I've actually
kidding.
worked in two of your studios, John, and they're both beautiful. That one and JSM. But I just have to tell an anecdote. It's super funny because in the movie you were saying about, somebody was saying about how you just couldn't, you walked up to the door, you couldn't get in because it was super secure. And I was working on a Saturday at the studio, downtime, standing outside, taking a break, and I'm just standing out there, and the kid walks up to the door, he pulls on the door, and he can't get in. I'm like, I can't let you in. It's a working studio. You can't come in. Oh, I came all the way from so-and-so. I love Hendrix. I've come just to this. I'm sorry, I can't help you there. And after a bit of haggling, the guy pulled his pants down and showed me a picture of Hendrix on his ass. To which I said, "Come with me." And I took him in and I gave him the 45.
It doesn't get better than that.
Doesn't get better than that.
I'm just going to sanitize the mic before the next.
I have a question.
Yes.
Except for living on Great Jones Street for years, I have no connection to the studio. But my question for you is, hearing some of these anecdotes from all of you and seeing some of these stills, how do you think the studio would translate today with everyone's over interest in social media and sharing things constantly? Because it sounds like a lot of the, or it seems like a lot of the images and the stories that you shared with us have such a patina that if we got to see them firsthand, they might not seem as special. And I wonder what you think Hendrix and his entire crew would think of social media.
Wow. It's a,
Well, that's
it's
about
it's a
6
loaded
questions.
question. It's a loaded question. I mean,
I have,
I'm sure you go.
well, not what Jimmy would think now, that's, I'm gonna let Eddie answer that one. But the Electric Lady Studios, I mean, what you saw was, realize what you saw here was a picture, essentially a time capsule of about 2 years.
Right.
Okay? Electric Lady Studios has been going for 55 years. Okay? One of the magical, one of the reasons why it's magical today is that it is extremely private. Okay? There's never really been a big sign. It's the same sign that's always been there. I mean, this curve came down and sort of an obscure piece of aluminum siding, you know, just the storefront thing went up. But the magic, part of the magic of it is that you slip in very quietly. You go down the stair. There's no elevator. For the life of me, actually, I'm not sure how they legally get away with that all these years, but that's another conversation. Okay, so 55 years, every one of those musicians has walked down the stairs and up the stairs. Okay, all the equipment has gone down and up. Okay, it's very private, even though it's in a pretty noisy street. I mean, it's on 8th Street. There's nothing really quiet about 8th Street, and I think, to me, that's part of the charm of it. I mean, there's everything else. There's the technically it's advanced. We've talked a lot about the sound. If you want to go down the river conversation or the vibe conversation or the membrane roof conversation, those are all fine. But what everybody, I think, what it is now is very, very private. And so all these stories are fun and they're interesting. And they were required to get it built, but it's not what the studio's about now. And I'll let Eddie chime in a little bit more. I believe that it would have been quiet now. Even, you know, it's interesting I have thought about what would have Jimmy, how much music did we miss because we've lost him at such an early age. Jimmy was actually a pretty quiet guy. You've heard that. You heard a lot of people say that. Very quiet, almost shy. And
he got a lot of publicity, of course.
yeah,
being
but he
Jimi
was
Hendrix,
he
but
himself
as a
was very
human-
quiet and very shy. And I think that's part of the magic of it. So what you saw here was a noisy time capsule, but it's not really what the studio is about.
Just further to your question about
I don't know if
the
that answered.
further to your question about the imagery, John Beltry took a lot of those photographs,
Yeah.
and there was quite a few of my photographs in there too. There was one picture of Jimmy. It was the last picture I took of him. It was just before he went to England. But I took a whole ton of photographs in the construction period as well, because I'm doing a book on my life as well, on my history, and it's got, oh, thank you. And there's a lot of pictures in there, but I want to address what you suggested, was that the intimacy of those photographs is because the time was taken with a a 35mm camera where you just compose the shot, whereas opposed to your cell phone where you're going blah, 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 there is a difference, and it's processed on, it's analog. It's the analog world talking to us with a softer quality, and I think that's probably what you're reacting to. I do feel that Mr. Hendrix probably would have been a little shocked. Although he did, I mean, you know, he was talking to the press. I mean, he wasn't publicity shy, but he was a quiet man.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, there were, as John suggests, there were a couple of sides of Jimmy. One was a public side that was part of the persona that he presented to
Yeah.
the world.
Right.
And then there was a private, quiet,
Very
shy.
quiet.
You know, the images that are in some ways very moving in this film are when Jimmy is just holding his guitar, not even playing. There's a couple of images where he's just sitting there, and you know the legendary story about how he used to sleep in the bed with his guitar. He is somebody whose relationship to his music and the music that he heard and created was really the essence of Jimi Hendrix, I would say. Yes, sir.
Eddie, just a quick question. Do you
I can
embrace
hear. I got it.
the digital recording world, or do you still like to make records go on a tape now?
Well, we chatted about that briefly when I first met you tonight. My world is a combination. It's a set. Well, there was a period when I was not embracing the digital system at all. When it first came out, I thought, good grief, this is sounding horrible. But inevitably, I had to sort of embrace it, and I do. And certainly Pro Tools and all the way we're recording today with 24-bit 96K, it sounds pretty damn good. But if you look at Electric Lady, as using that as an example, and any big name studio, it's a combination. Yeah. It's the analog world for the console, for the sound, a vintage Neve desk, and the latest in Pro Tools and the latest in plugins and the latest this, that, and the other, but a ton of analog stuff. If you want to record Electric Lady on a 24-track machine, it's there. And then you transfer it from there into Pro Tools. So my world is a hybrid world, which I definitely embrace.
Do you like the idea of the visual? Like now, people when they're making music, they're looking at a screen, and I also make music like.
I know you told me in your studio, yes.
And so, but I always hated the fact that people are staring at a screen.
You are absolutely right. I have to smack myself sometimes because I'm staring at the goddamn screen. I have to close my eyes and just think about the music and say, yeah, there's where I want to cut it. It's a convenience. It's fast. There's no question. But yes.
All those great records you made, there was no screens.
No, just ears, of course. But
And the tactile relationship that you had
well,
with the creation of
the
music.
tactile relationship in the tape, where you would cut the tape, you know, and join it together to make a mix. Anyway.
Thank you.
Sir, yeah.
I was happy to hear of your love and knowledge of classical music. And I know John is very knowledgeable about opera and loves it. And it made me think of the Beatles and Martin's influence that he had bringing in piccolo trumpets and harpsichords and orchestras. And I'm wondering what your thought there of other engineers and other people, and what influence did classical music have on your actual work, the end result of your work?
Oh, the classical music had a huge, and still does to this day. I mean, I see and hear this music in a stereophonic form now, and of course in the Dolby Atmos, which is a little trickier, but essentially I see it and I hear it as the song is appearing to me when the band first plays. I can picture where the instruments are going to go. I love the idea of bringing in classical elements, that's for sure. If I can convince the band to do that, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not always possible with a 3-piece or a 4-piece rock group to bring in orchestral features, but I think in orchestral terms, how broad a brush I can draw across the screen, as you just put it, and give it some more depth. I hope I'm addressing the question properly for you.
I always found it amazing that, because people who can picture it, it's in the middle of the village, in the center of the village. It's built, again, like the movie says, over Minetta Creek, but it's also built over the West 4th Street station stop in the village, and you can hear it in Studio Bay. And you're built right over it. It's like the engineering feat.
How did you do that, John?
Well, 12-inch sand-filled block. It's
Did you float the floor? Did you?
yeah, the electric lady is an excellent, despite the fact that it's sort of not really on a river. It's really on a water table that's left over from a river, and it's about 200 feet from the stop. But despite that, because I teach studio design, it's actually a pretty good site for, yeah, because it's slab on grade. It's at the bottom of a building. There is no basement below it. It's on dirt. And so basically, we re-poured the slab. There's really two slabs there. And the slabs don't touch each other. So as opposed to, they don't touch each other. So essentially, they're individual separate rooms. Not only can't you hear the subway, but you can't hear one studio from another. And I assure you
That's the big thing.
that's really
That's the trick.
yeah, and that's the trick. And it's still, to this day, maybe one of the best ways to build a studio, but it's expensive. It was expensive then, it's expensive now, and you need to be on the bottom of a building.
There's a lady in the back there.
Yeah.
I can't see.
Some people say that every now and then they can hear the rumble a little bit, but I'm not sure if that's really
It's so far
true.
down on the audio
It's pretty
spectrum,
far
you
down,
can
yeah.
filter
Hello?
it. Yes, I can't see who. Oh, hi. Sorry.
Mr. Kramer, this is gonna be totally unrelated from
I love
every
it.
other question, but I'm a metal fan, and I know that you produced Anthrax's
Damn right I did.
Among the Living in
Yeah.
1986.
It was a big change for me.
I was just wondering what producing the record was like for you, and if you have any notable stories from that time.
Yeah, as I said, it was a big change because I'd never done a heavy metal one. I guess you would call it a heavy metal band. And it was enjoyable, but it was a shock in the sense that it was a totally different. I had to really figure out how am I going to record this band. But I finally did. We did it down in Florida. One of the cool things about the band was that if things weren't going too well in the studio, everybody decided to flip instruments, like the drummer played bass, and the bass player played drums, and that kind of, just for giggles. And in fact, the story that I'll quickly tell you is that there was a song called "I'm the Man," which became a big hit in the UK. I think got to number 14. Everybody in the band flipped instruments, and I played piano on it, which was really crazy. But I just had to sort of think outside of the box. I'd never done one before, and it worked out well. The record did very well, and I haven't really done too many heavy metal bands. Some very hard rock bands, but it was interesting. It was a bit of a challenge because I had never done anything quite like it. I hope that answers your question.
So, last question, anybody?
Or Eddie. When you're listening to music, are you able to separate the music from the technology?
Yes, the music is first. The music is first.
Always first.
The music, the technology is secondary. I would not like to think that the technology of recording gets in the way of the music. It's the reverse for me. If the music is coming through and it's good and it's clear and and there's an emotional connection, that's primary. That's my primary function, is to capture that performance as real as I can make it. And can I make it sound better by adding the technology? Yes, but music first.
Great question. So, to wrap it up, thank you guys.
Oh, maybe on the way out we can do it?
Yeah, pick one. Yeah, well, we'll end and listen on this.
No,
We'll listen as we leave.
as we depart.
So thanks, John Storyk. Thanks to Mark,